Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 540.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other CashFlow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, and welcome back to the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because here's what it comes down to. When you are out there, we're both trying to figure out how to make our life work. We're building a business, and usually we have a goal. At some point, you want to enter into this stage that many people call retirement. Now, that means something different to each and every one of us. You guys know that retirement is not exactly something. I tried that already, didn't quite work out, and I needed a way to still contribute. And some of you may fall into that pot, and that's also okay. And others of you, maybe all you're thinking about is, fishing and escaping and traveling and photos, and that too is also fine. Here's the thing. No matter what retirement actually means for you, there is a point at which you must plan for and fund what it is you intend to do, regardless of the activity level. Now, what's also interesting is that sometimes what we don't know can and has always hurt us. What I mean this time is simply there is an act that I believe that the majority of us have never, ever read, because why would you? The history books wouldn't focus on it, but it is known as the Employment Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. And you're like, what does this have to do with anything? Well, today we're going to talk about some things that are typically called alternative investments. You and I, we have more options than we think. And if you've been using 401ks, IRAs, or any sort of qualified plan, I think today's guest is interested not only to talk to you, but you have more interest to talk to him than you probably already understand. I'm, of course, talking about the idea of being able to do more with those assets, those 401ks and IRAs, and you actually think is possible. And I have with me today none other than the founder and CEO of Alto, the alternative IRA, Eric Satz. Now, what's interesting about Eric is that, well, I'm told that he really, really, really likes football a whole lot. Now, we're not going to talk about football, but if something like that comes out, don't be surprised. But let's focus on what he can do, and more importantly, how his company can help you and I make sure that we get the best out of the assets that we have available. So do me a favor. Let's get ready to listen, learn, and love Eric Satz. Eric, how you doing?
Jay, that is the single greatest podcast interview I've ever been associated with. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. We're just getting started. Now, I have to ask you the same question I tend to ask everybody else the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
All ears.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes, like Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. Because I tend to think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as an entrepreneur, occasionally I can envision myself flying around town, using our products and services, and saving customers one sale at a time. And yes, at that moment, I am probably wearing a cape. Also, though, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. For example, if you think about Spider-Man, there was a time where he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing. And then one day he gets bit by a spider, discovers, oh man, I have a superhuman ability, and he has to choose whether to use it for good or for evil. So my question to you is as follows. Before, working at Credit Suisse, before, all of your Miami Dolphins and the Canes, and before everything that people know you for today, especially even before teaching the entrepreneurship class that you do, what we want to know is, who is Eric Satz?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think I'm a product of my parents, which is a very just kind of straightforward and plain vanilla answer, I know. But my parents were my mom and dad were two very different individuals. I'm still trying to figure out how it is they got married in the first place. But their personalities vastly different from one another, and I think both had significant impacts on who I eventually became. And I think my mom in particular had a very strong entrepreneurial influence on my personality. And my dad had a greater sort of level setting, even keel approach to the world. And so I think it's an interesting mix. I do believe that we are who we are when we pop out, and then the rest is environment, right? And I think I feel fortunate that the two major environmental influences on who I am, who I have become, what I have done, were my mom and dad. And so maybe not the answer you were looking for, but it's the one that comes to mind.
Oh, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, most of the individuals, when I ask them that question, they start out with someone who's been significant in their life. And not everybody, talks about, parents specifically. But yes, this totally makes sense to me. Now, I am curious, though, because I know there's a number of entrepreneurs who are listening that are wondering, what was that path like for you? How did you go from where you started to where you are specifically? Like, what were some of the first, I'm curious if mom was entrepreneurial, I'm guessing she was supportive of little Eric's first ideas. And I would love to hear about what some of those were.
Yeah, I mean, they were both very supportive. And, what's interesting is that my dad is an oral surgeon and was a doctor. In a certain sense, we often overlook the required entrepreneurial spirit that a doctor actually has to have to start his or her practice, from scratch. I think it's a lot different today, given where we are with medicine and the healthcare system. Doesn't happen quite the same way. But 40 years ago, 50 years ago, not to say how old I am, 50 almost, but when a doctor started a practice, it was mostly he at that point, but let's just say he and she, they were taking big financial risks. They had to borrow money to build out their office. They had to hire employees, and then they had to find customers, patients, right? And so like everybody else, they had to market. But in support of my dad's effort, I think my mom had 3 jobs at a time. And, they both worked incredibly hard. And I think I saw that. I think it rubbed off. And I would say that my first venture was selling frozen lemonade out of an unair conditioned, bright yellow van in South Florida, in Miami.
Nice.
In 100-degree heat. And so that was a big, for all the entrepreneurs out there, I mean, it was a very simple business model. The more I sold, the more I made, right?
Yes.
And your costs were easy to calculate. Cups, straws, and ice, right? So, and some flavoring, but
right.
And then gas.
Yes,
the gas was there. But the more you sold, the more you made. You try to optimize your route for customers, and then you'd have big events, right? On the weekends, you'd go to festivals and to music concerts and places where you could just kill it in a single day that was unlike any other sort of day of the week. So that's kind of where it all started. And it went from there into a paper route at college where I distributed the Boston Globe and the New York Times. So those were the first two real entrepreneurial ventures for me.
Nice. I like this. I like this, especially the lemonade in the unair conditioned van.
That's an important part in South Florida.
Well, yeah, you had to sell quickly. I like it. It's like, oh, we got to move this product and we got to move it right now. I 100% like that. Now, what I'm curious to know then, as we go from the lemonade to the paper route, you then had some time in banking, etc., and that preceded what you do today. And I'm curious to hear more about that.
So I went from college to Wall Street. I went to a firm called DLJ, which was Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, which I still think was the greatest investment bank ever to be created and to grow, and eventually went public, and was public when Credit Suisse First Boston bought DLJ. And the fun thing about DLJ is that we still have reunions every 5 years, and that's how close that particular investment banking community was and is. And I still talk to these people. I still email with these people. I see them when I go to New York or San Francisco, and that's really fun. It was a special place. And but the other thing about DLJ, it was built by entrepreneurs. Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette were all entrepreneurs. And then it attracted that type of individual as well, which meant that our client base, our customer base, was also very entrepreneurial. You know, Starbucks was a great example. It was a great customer of client of DLJ, and obviously everybody knows Starbucks today. And there were hundreds of others like Starbucks. So I was at DLJ for 3 years before I left to actually found a coffee bar in New York City called Ganymede's Coffee. And part of the reason I mentioned Starbucks is because I opened the coffee bar the same month that Starbucks opened its first location in New York City.
Wow.
And they got better real estate than I did. And I made, this is important for your listener. I made 3 mistakes when I built out the coffee bar. The first was location. The second was location, and the third, was location. So, I violated the 3 rules of retail real estate.
Right.
But as with anything, you learn a hell of a lot more in your failures than you do in your successes. When you succeed, you just think you're so great. When you fail, and the coffee bar really was my first failure, you got to take a step back. You've got to assess. You got to self-evaluate, and you really got to dig into, what your plan was, what actually happened, and where you could have done things differently and why, if you even would have done things differently. So, from there, I actually ran back to Wall Street for cover, went back to DLJ eventually. First went to UBS, where I did large bankruptcy restructurings because I figured out that I was good at it on my own. I could do it for other people.
Right. I got experience here. I can help.
Yeah. No, I mean, it literally is how I got the job. I was having, I think, the single worst interview of my life. And I think just out of mercy, the guy who was interviewing me, who became a real mentor and my boss, was like, well, tell me about the coffee bar. We got nothing else to talk about, is kind of what his face said. And I described to him how I had negotiated my way out of a very long lease. And that for him, the light bulb went off, and it was kind of like, oh, this guy understands negotiation and leverage. Let me dive into that a bit deeper. And that's how I got hired at UBS. And then my wife was looking at purchasing an art gallery actually out in San Francisco. And so I actually agreed to go back to DLJ, move from New York to San Francisco, and help jumpstart DLJ's internet investment banking effort out in San Fran on April Fool's Day, 1998. Still trying to figure out who the joke was on. But that was a hell of a ride, and again, a lot to learn. And while I was out there, I co-founded a company called Currenex, which was an online foreign currency exchange business that 8 years later, State Street bought for nearly $600 million. And so that's what we call a good outcome. And, shortly after San Francisco, not shortly after, 5 or 6 years later, we moved to Nashville, which is where my wife grew up, which is where I'm speaking to you from now. And I know that you were up in Clarksville, just a little bit north of us for high school.
Yep.
I've driven up there a lot to watch a lot of soccer games for my kids. And also have a lot of friends who were in the military and stationed up there as well. But so we moved to Nashville, and then we started an online organic grocery delivery business called Plum Good Food, and then launched a venture capital firm called Tennessee Community Ventures, where we invest solely in Tennessee-based businesses. And as a result of that activity, came across this opportunity to use your IRA to invest in alternative assets. But the problem was it was really complicated to figure out. It took a really long time. And if I weren't on the board of the company I wanted to invest in, they never would have waited for me to figure it out. And I figured out that it was too expensive for most people. Mm-hmm. And so, as you mentioned at the introduction, which is what I meant to say rather than interview, the introduction, the industry really hadn't changed since ERISA was created in 1974. It was completely people and paper based. And it just looked like with $30 trillion sitting in retirement savings, we could apply some technology against this opportunity and make it accessible to everyone. And just to tie this back to the introduction again of retirement, everything that you were mentioning to me screams choice. And that is, we want everyone in America to have the choice of retirement, right? To be able to choose whether or not you want to go fishing or whether you want to continue to go to the office and do some good and hopefully not evil, right? And it's our mission to make sure that everyone has that choice at the end of the day, because if nothing changes about the way we invest today, we're going to have 25 million Americans sitting in poverty come 2050.
And, it's knowing things like that gets me excited to speak to individuals like yourself who have a passion behind it, because when it comes down to it, it's what we don't know. It's the fact that the area that your company specializes in, it's been around since 1974, which is code for a long time, long enough that the word could have, should have already been out, but hasn't really. And for a lot of people listening, it could absolutely sound new what you and I are about to talk about. But there's one thing that you said earlier that I've got to illuminate just a little bit. You mentioned that with your coffee bar, you had made 3 mistakes, and the mistake was location, location, location. I would venture to say that there's a number of people who have made that same mistake, but with their retirement plan, the location, the location, the location. Where they have placed it is cutting off their opportunity. What would you say?
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful analogy. Spot on. And, where the financial industry has gone today is investments in ETFs, mutual funds, and index funds. And the problem with that is that our expectations of returns should not be any higher than somewhere between 4% and 6%. And this is simple math exercise. We're not going to be able to retire if what we earn on our retirement savings, no matter what your time horizon is only 4 to 6%, right? We need some outsized returns. And the fact of the matter is that the public markets have changed in such a way that the companies that used to go private, raising $50 to $100 million and being valued at, $500, $600 million, companies like Amazon and Google and Yahoo and others, these companies are now private until they're worth tens of billions of dollars. Companies like Uber and Lyft and Slack and others, right? Which means that the everyday American doesn't get an opportunity to participate in those deals until they're overvalued in many respects, right?
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No. I mean, and this is the point. I often in presentations where I've gone and said things like this, people have a number of mixed feelings, and I forgot to issue a warning that as Eric and I talk today, you may find yourself in a spot when you get a little mad, and that's okay, because that's normal. But you may also feel some relief or an understanding that there is hope, because Eric, what it comes down to is I get frustrated because when we don't know something, opportunity is limited, but it's not just limited to the person who has the retirement plan. It's also limited to the would-be entrepreneur that is looking for funds. Not everybody's got the relationships in San Fran or up in Silicon Valley in order to make something happen. And someone they're sitting next to, listening to the podcast right now, could be the very reason that they get something done. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and I'm glad that you are enjoying what you are hearing thus far. But here's one of the things that's really important. One of the most important things that you can do is get started. One of the things that I've said before, and I say again, once you get started, stay started. But more importantly, there can be lots of roadblocks to getting started. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove one of those roadblocks for you and make it a little bit easier. Because the thing that I don't want to stop you is thinking, do I need a local number? How about a long distance number? Or should it be 800? How on earth am I going to make that happen so that people can contact me as I'm out there building my business, making my cash flow grow? But most importantly, understanding that it doesn't have to be difficult. Many of you may know, but if you don't, there's a company out there by the name of Grasshopper. And what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygrasshopper.com/cashflowdiary. Grasshopper is the entrepreneur's phone system. It works like a traditional phone system, but requires no hardware to purchase, no software to install. It's just a number that flat works. So if you are out there building that distributed workforce across many different locations, it's a way for you to still go out there and make your number be unified, simple, easy to use, something we've been using for quite some time. So again, go over to trygrasshopper.com/cashflowdiary. Now, let's get back to the rest of the story.
No, look, I think that's exactly correct. And, you bring up 2 points that I want to comment on. One is that most people raising money don't know that they can accept IRA retirement dollars as an investment any more than the people who actually have IRA retirement dollars know that they can access it for investing in a privately owned business or a piece of real estate, residential, commercial, multifamily housing, whatever it may be. And so, you can see someone having a conversation at a coffee bar, right? Like, I really like your business. I'd love to invest in it, but I only have savings in retirement, which is 90% of all savings in the country lives in retirement accounts. So that wouldn't be that strange, right? And then you can see someone on the other side saying, yeah, my lawyers told me it was, I can't take retirement money, or it's too hard to take retirement money, or, whatever it may be, some excuse because the lawyer just doesn't want to do work for something that's a little bit different. And the fact of the matter is that we've solved for all of these things. We've made it super simple and easy. We have relationships on our platform with both investors and issuers. We execute deals online, and we do it all electronically. And that was the whole purpose in building the platform. It was to identify scalable technology that works for both the investor and the issuer, entity, individual raising money or selling real estate, and to do it all online in a tax efficient and cost effective manner so that it would be accessible to everyone. And that's what we're doing. I mean, until I made my first alternative IRA investment 4 years ago, and I've been investing for 20 something years, I didn't know you could do this, right? And there are a lot of people, there are a lot of sophisticated investors out there who don't know you can do this. So you're not alone if you're sitting there thinking, well, I mean, I didn't know I could do. I thought I could only invest in IBM or Cisco or pick a public company. And you're not alone. It's not the case. Most people don't know you can do this.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I'm realizing that you and we've delved deep into this because we understand it, and I'm passionate about it. So are you, because we need to take a step and just tell them what do you mean by an alternative IRA or an alternative investment? What is it that you and we're dancing around the subject, but let's be very direct. What is it that they don't understand about their retirement plan, their 401k, IRA, that they currently have, that they don't know that they actually can do with you guys?
That great point. So if we take a step back and up, you can define an alternative asset in two ways. You can sort of do it by saying what it isn't, and then you can do it by saying what it is. So what it isn't is a publicly traded security, whether that's equity or debt instrument. You can't go to the New York Stock Exchange. You can't go to NASDAQ, place an order and buy it through a traditional broker dealer.
But hold on, Eric. My HR department and my current financial planner, they say I can choose whatever I want. It is self-directed, is it not?
So that's why we don't call the alternative IRA. That's why we don't call it a self-directed IRA. To me, saying self-directed IRA is like saying natural food, right? It has no definition. It means something different to every single person who wants to use the phrase. So I can have an account at Fidelity or Schwab or TD or JP Morgan or pick your broker dealer of choice. You can have an account and you can quote unquote self-direct the investments of that account, but that just means you get to choose from the approved list of publicly traded securities that particular institution says is quote unquote suitable for your retirement account. And by the way, the conventional wisdom on what's suitable for your retirement account, and I told you up front, by the way, I'm gonna cut out all the F-bombs. Okay. So I'm not going to, so I would have dropped one right there. All right. But who these people think they are to tell us what we can and can't invest in. Ooh. And the idea that we should be investing conservatively with our retirement account is just plain old backwards. All right.
Yeah, no, you and I could see that you and I probably can get each other set off here on this topic alone, because it before doing real estate, I was the financial planner. I didn't know this. And then when I learned this, that's when I stopped being a financial planner and starting helping people. My first $5 million of real estate transactions was done with retirement plans. And because I didn't have, and then I knew other people didn't, but I was able to leverage that and to build a career. If not for what you do, there would just not be. And that's what gets under my skin, is that it limits the opportunity of the entrepreneur. In so many ways.
Drives me absolutely bonkers. Just drives me absolutely bonkers. Because if you think about it, look, you shouldn't touch this money until you retire. America is one of the only countries, the United States is one of the only countries where we say, okay, you need your retirement money, withdraw it early, and you're going to pay a penalty. Right. But almost no other developed country allows you to take out your retirement savings early, and we shouldn't allow it here. But that's another podcast. In any event, let's assume that you're not going to do I'm going to say it differently. Let's assume that you're going to do the smart thing and you're going to leave your money in until retirement. All right. That means these are long-term savings dollars. They should be invested in long-term illiquid assets, because those are the assets that are going to earn you a premium over time. The public markets have a liquidity discount associated with them. All right. The idea is that you can always sell those securities, get access to your cash, and for that you pay a price. And that is a lower return for the most part. All right. And so if you know that actually most of us know that we're going to need cash, we just don't know when we're going to need it because the car's going to break down, the roof's going to leak, we got to replace the air conditioner or the hot water heater, or we have a healthcare scare, whatever it may be. That cash that you need to access should be your after-tax cash. It should not be your retirement savings. And so the after-tax cash should be invested in highly liquid securities, and your long-term tax-advantaged dollars ought to be invested in the illiquid opportunities like real estate, like private companies.
If I'm listening to you, it's almost like you're saying we have it exactly backwards, Eric.
We do have it exactly backwards, Jay. We do. We do. And I'm not saying it was always exactly backwards, by the way, but where we are today, it is exactly backwards.
So when it comes down to it, though, and I'm going to test here. I'm just curious if you have this same feeling that I have. When I look at like the Securities and Exchange Act of 1933, 34, and they have this term, this accredited investor, and the qualifications for such. Because there's a number of people listening who would love, they understand what you're saying, but yet, they're automatically disqualified from being even offered or even to find out about some of these long-term illiquid assets because they don't meet this definition of accredited, even though you could argue that they understand it better than some people who do meet that definition.
So this is where I just have to call bullshit, okay? And, sorry for that, but
no, this is great. You feel exactly the way I do.
Very limited vocabulary, and that's the word I got.
Yeah.
Right. So the Securities Act of 33 and 34. I mean, if we go back to why they were created, it's because we had a bunch of people running around this country ripping people off, raising money for railroads that were never going to get built. Okay. And there was this investor protection that was created back in 33 and 34. And, everything sort of has a time and a place. We've got more information available to us today than we ever did. All right. So there's and by the way, just so the audience knows, the definition of accredited investor is someone who has $1 million of liquid net worth, not including their primary residence, and or has earned $200,000 individually or $300,000 as a couple that files taxes jointly over the last 2 years and expects to earn the same amount in the current year. So if you don't meet that requirement, then you fall into the quote unquote non-accredited bucket. But what the government is essentially saying is that people who have money are smarter than people who don't, and I just take issue with that. All right,
you and me both.
Right, and so that needs to change. And that there are a lot of people who, the joke is, how do they become millionaires? They start with 10 million, right? I think people who know that their future depends on how their investments are going to perform over time. I hope anyway that they're going to do their homework. They're going to do their diligence. They're going to get smart about the investments that they want to make. And I think it's entirely unfair to say that they can't or won't because we've never given them the opportunity. Now that's changing a little bit, by the way. About 3 years ago, the Jobs Act was passed.
Yes.
This had nothing to do with Steve Jobs.
You're right.
Although it kind of did, right? It's kind of fitting that it's the Jobs Act.
Sure.
But Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. And within the Jobs Act was something called Title III, which resulted in the creation of regulation crowdfunding platforms. And these platforms were created and approved by the SEC and FINRA to allow companies to raise money from non-accredited investors. So now anyone can invest in a private equity opportunity so long as the company that's raising the money is doing so via one of these what's called Reg CF platforms. Examples of this are WeFunder, Republic, Ground Floor, and Silicon Prairie, and others that are out there. And so that's a change that has taken place. It still has, in my opinion, some limitations and restrictions that need to be amended, edited, improved upon. Hopefully that will happen. I know there's a new committee in Washington that's assessing the current regulations, trying to figure out how to make them more useful both to the investor and to the issuer. But that's the beginning of what I hope will be some significant change in this space.
So, oh man, you feel like a kindred spirit in so many ways because you're doing something about it. You just chose to do something about it from the other end. I was like, cool, let me go find all of the people who know how to hold and custody the assets, and I'll work with them and tell people, and then create entrepreneurs. Now, I'm curious to know, when you look at this whole scenario, being able to do something with your retirement plan, because what you and I are talking about, I mean, I know what happens, when I talk to people, they say, well, my financial planner said, my CPA said, my accountant said, my bookkeeper said, somebody said, I can't do this. And I'm curious to know, why do you think it is not common knowledge, and why does it feel like, it's hard sometimes to get people to understand that no, you can have more control and it's okay?
Well, there's a there's a conflict of interest built into this particular financial channel, right? If you're investing on your own in an alternative asset, there's nothing that your financial advisor can do to benefit from this particular investment, right? They didn't identify the private equity opportunity. They didn't identify the piece of real estate. They're watching your they're watching a significant chunk of your portfolio on which they are earning fees leave their umbrella, right? And so they're not exactly. I'll say it more strongly. It's not in their interest to advise you to invest in alternative assets because they don't make any money on you that way. So it's perverse.
And that was the part that got under my skin in a whole different way, because I didn't understand. In fact, I've often told people is because I've done this. This is like an actual transaction where I have went and I bought a building and it had a cell phone tower on it. We were able to sell the cell phone tower separately, and we ended up selling the cell phone tower to one of these places where everyone who is contributing their 401k and IRA money to, that 401k and IRA money came to us vis-a-vis that company. And I'm just like, wow, I just got a whole bunch of their retirement money. They're contributing their $50 or whatever it is straight out of their retirement plan or out of their paycheck. And this company is going to make a very, very big, part of the return and then pay them what's left. And I'm like, I don't like this system. I'm like, wow. And the fact that we don't know this is the challenge. So when it comes down to running into the education space and figuring it out, how loud have you guys found yourself having to be? How many times do you find yourself having to fight for other people simply because because what we don't know?
Well, God, I don't even know where to start with my answer on that one, Jay. We got into the business because in traditional entrepreneurial story, right? Like I had a problem. I wanted to use my IRA money to invest in one of my portfolio companies. And it was a disaster of a process and experience. So obviously I did it a couple more times because I wanted to figure out whether I was the only one with this problem or whether there were others. And if there were others, how many and how big was the opportunity? And it was really a utilitarian exercise at the beginning in the sense that I figured out there were $30 trillion in retirement savings, less than 1% invested in alternative assets. And the process that was in place for people to actually access their money and make an investment, assuming that they knew they could, which was the first obstacle. Most people didn't know you could. The second was just overly complicated and time consuming. And the third was it was too expensive for most people to make an investment of a size that they could afford to make. And so what started out as a very utilitarian exercise to fix a very large market opportunity, to fix and address, I should say, a very large market opportunity, really evolved into a passion and drive to address what is a looming retirement crisis in this country. And, I feel like we've got 80 million IRA accounts, 70 million 401k accounts. And over the next 20 years, we ought to have at least 50 million alternative IRA accounts because America needs access to and exposure to real estate and private companies to generate some outsized returns and really put us in a position where we're going to be able to retire come, whatever our retirement age and year is, should we choose to do that.
So let's go on the fun side for a little minute because I'm curious that I bet there's a few people who are wondering, what are some of the strangest or craziest things that you've seen your clients be able to now choose where to place their funds?
Well, we don't judge anything that way, and
Sure.
So, and I don't mean to suggest that you're suggesting that, but it's not really crazy. I think it's more interesting. And what we've done with our platform and the technology we've built which is all API driven. We've enabled our users to execute transactions seamlessly with our investment platform partners, like AngelList, like WeFunder, like Silicon Prairie, and others. Yield Street for those who are listening who are familiar with Yield Street. We'd like to add CrowdStreet and Peer Street as well, and we're working on that. But because we are fully integrated with these platform providers, we get to see a lot of the really interesting companies that are growing up, that are popping up, that are starting to spread their wings in Silicon Valley, also in Southern California, and Boston, Chicago, New York, Nashville, if they're healthcare focused, Austin, Dallas, Houston. So we're seeing a lot of activity. We see it early, and that's a really fun part about what we're doing. There's a lot of data collected with respect to investment activity in the country.
Yeah, I absolutely like how you guys are approaching this. I've worked personally with a number of custodians, and I wish more of them were online and had some APIs into easier things, etc. So I definitely like what you guys are doing. Now that let's assume that there's a number of people who have listened this far, and they probably want to find out more what you guys are doing over there. What's going to be the best way for them to track you down?
Yeah, so the best way is to go to www.acflow.com. ALTOIRA.com, altoira.com. In addition, I don't hesitate to pass out my email, Eric Satz at altoira.com. But also the people who really know what's going on, if you just email help at altoira.com, that's probably the best way to get the best help and best attention. And there also is going to be a link on the website shortly here. And actually, by the time this podcast rolls, the link should be up there where you can just schedule a demo with our team. And unlike a lot of other places, we want to talk to you, and we want to help you, and we want to help explain. And then finally, if you do have investments sitting with other custodians, and for whatever reason you're less than thrilled, or you feel like you're paying too much, we also accept security transfers. So you can transfer those holdings to us, and we can be your best friend and custodian.
I love it, 100%. Now, I have a final question for you, because as we wind down, I'm curious to hear your response, given your diverse background and experience, your entries, your exits, the successes, failures, and whatnot. I know that there's individuals listening, who they started this episode in one place, but now they're at another. They may have gotten to the point that said, okay, cool. Well, if Eric can go through all of that, if Eric can fail with a coffee bar and picking the wrong location, you know what? I can try. I can do something. Or, maybe it's time for me to actually make that IRA do something. I can get to there. They're at what I like to call the precipice of decision. Now, like I know, that when we get to those decision points, we often have a companion, and it's a companion that comes in the form of a voice. And it's a voice that reminds us often of, well, the last thing didn't work, and why is this one going to work? And oh my God, you're going to do what? For who? No one's going to listen to you. Why are you even trying? I mean, don't you know that Wall Street's already got that game locked up? Why don't you just quit? And for some people, they are related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that this time it's going to be different. This time they're going to follow through. They're going to do exactly what you suggest, Eric. And they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
I'd suggest they go all in. You can't, in my opinion, this is purely my opinion. Well, the first thing, I'm going to step back a second. You got to make, if you do have a partner, if you are quote unquote related to that other voice, you have to make sure you're on the same page. Otherwise, that's going to be the end of that relationship. So that's that's the single most important thing, I think, for most people. Make sure that you and your partner are on the same page with any entrepreneurial decision-making activity or process. Assuming that you are and that you're going to go forward and do this, don't do it halfway. You got to be all in, and you got to commit to it. And otherwise, you're just second guessing yourself the entire way through. You just got to believe in yourself. You got to know that it's not all straight up and to the right. That there are a lot of bumps in the road. You're going to hit potholes. You're going to hit ditches. It's going to be tough. One of the things that I talk about in this high school entrepreneurial class that I teach with one of my colleagues when we get these students. And by the way, this is an entrepreneurial exercise. We started with one school 3 years ago and 12 kids, and we have 5 schools and almost 40 kids this year. So that's been fun. And by the way, if there's any sort of if there's anything that's going on in this country that gives me hope for the future, it's spending 2 hours a week with high school students and listening to their entrepreneurial ideas and drive. But one of the things that we talk about is, if you're going to go be an entrepreneur because you're going to make a ton of money, stop. Okay. It just doesn't happen that way, right? If it did, everybody would do it. It's really hard. It tests your character, and you got to be committed. You got to be passionate about it, and you really got to want to do it. And so that's what I would say.
I like it 100%. I appreciate, again, everything that you've done, and it's clear to see how, the younger version of Eric, who was out there with the
I had a lot more hair.
Yeah, well, yeah, I get that, but that might be, we can still hear the youth that's there, that same person who was hustling with the lemonade and whatnot, and making it happen, and all the things that you have gone through, and how you've taken those and turned them into something that, well, can just continually benefit even more individuals. And just let me be the first to say thanks for taking the time to share your knowledge, wisdom, and insight here with us today at the CashFlow Diary, sir.
Jay, it was a sincere pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I hope for us to be able to meet in person next time I'm on the West Coast, or if you're in Nashville.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to altoira.com. Look up Eric Satz. He gave you his email. That's not normal. That means use it, because you have questions. You have that IRA. You got those assets. They're sitting idle or they're underperforming, and you've just been introduced to a way to make that change. Here's the thing. Understand that what you've just learned today is not common knowledge. So you definitely want to make sure that you share this with a friend, because they need the help too. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been fun talking to you guys today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.